Hello there and welcome to yet another series of The Big Interview. My name is Zainab Ismail and our guest today, she was the former Deputy Chair of the Committee of Experts on the Review of the 2010 Constitution and also the former Executive Director of the Kenya Human Rights Commission and a fierce champion for women's rights here in the country. She's also worked on issues to do with human rights, equality, anti-corruption, as well as constitutionalism. Atsango Chesoni is here with us today. Thank you for joining us on The Big Interview.
Thank you, Zainab, and thank you for inviting me to be on The Big Interview.
Indeed. Now, Atsango, you were involved in the quest for constitutional reforms and women's rights from back in the day. Maybe just from your recollection, take us back to how that began being part of the Committee of Experts on the Review of the Constitution, how the 2010 Constitution was birthed.
So I basically got involved in the review process after coming home, and during that time, it was a time when there was a lot of agitation for change. We had just had our first multi-party elections in decades. It was the early 1990s. And one of the things that people realized, even after the repeal of Section 2A, Section 2A was the section under the old Constitution.
All right, welcome back, and the conversation continues. Part of the mandate that you had as well was to collect views from Kenyans as well. How was it, and how much did Kenyans really want these reforms?
Kenyans really wanted the reforms.
Right.
I mean, for me, the greatest example and one of the most affirming, this would not have been possible. In fact, I think the only reason the committee survived and the only reason we have the Constitution is because Kenyans wanted reforms.
Right.
So this acted as a check on the politicians. The politicians could only, this is why the attacks were so underhanded.
Right.
They would not openly come out and say they didn't, you know, they didn't want the Constitution. But for me, one of my memories of the process that I will never take, you know, that I will always treasure. When we first began, when we went to the field to collect, because under the Act, the first thing we were to do was to solicit from the public their opinion on what was contentious. And so we had a series of, we had a series of sittings in different parts of the country. And we broke into 3 teams of 3. And then the country was mapped in a way in which each team of 3 would go to a number of different places, yeah, in different parts of the country and have these sittings with people. And during those sittings, people would have to sign in when they were coming.
Right.
And for people who were attending the sittings,
so the idea of the 2/3 gender rule was birthed under the new Constitution. What did you envisage in the Constitution on this particular issue?
The whole idea of the 1/3 principle is basically vested in the equality principle. When you look at the Constitution, it provides for equality.
Right.
It provides for human rights, and it provides for respect for the rule of law. It also provides expressly for inclusion. I mean, the way people have been talking, if you look at Article 10, the word inclusion is there. So it basically, the Constitution recognizes that Kenyans are diverse. There are Kenyan women and there are Kenyan men.
Right.
Kenyans speak many different languages. And so our organs, our decision-making organs, must look like the diversity of the Kenyan people. We have people with disabilities, you know, so the Constitution provides for representation of all these people who historically have been excluded. With respect to the women, women are a marginalized group that is not a minority. Women are actually the majority of the population.
Right.
And what has been found over time in relation to civil and political rights is that where you have a large group like that, that has been excluded from decision-making and political office, it is not enough to have just one or two members of that group represented. You need what is known as a critical mass. And so at the Beijing conference in 1995, this critical mass for women was identified generally as being 1/3.
All right.
Yeah? And so governments across the globe, including Kenya, committed to the Beijing Declaration and committed to ensuring the 1/3 principle. I'm going into this because the issue of the 1/3 principle has been one that has been negotiated and been on the negotiation table actively since 1996. There was an attempt by Honorable Phoebe Asio when the women came back from Beijing to have a motion moved in Parliament that would then have the old constitution amended to ensure that women were 1/3.
Right.
The Asio motion failed. Honorable Beth Mugo then brought a motion for 1/3 in 1998. She was successful. However, what the women were told then was that in order for this to be effected, the constitution of the day would have to be amended because the constitution of the day fixed the number of parliamentary seats. And so so by then, the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission was in the process of being set up, and so they were told to take that issue.
The proposal to the
Constitution of Kenya Review Commission.
Right.
When you look at the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission is report, it says that the people of Kenya felt that the categories, the additional seats in Parliament needed to be created specifically for women, persons with disabilities, and the youth, the people who historically had been left out of Parliament.
Right.
So it's not a new thing. The mechanisms are known. I don't understand what particular little secret formula Kenya's political elite is looking for. I consider this to just be purely resistance. There is no commitment to having, to meeting that principle. Now, with COE, the draft that we sent to the Parliamentary Select Committee in Naivasha provided for mixed member proportional representation. So it followed the Munyarwanda system. We felt that we needed to provide for that because a lot of the representations that we had based on the first draft that we had released, because remember we released 2 drafts before the draft that went, we had released one other draft before the draft that went to the Parliamentary Select Committee. That first draft had not provided for MMPR, and we got a lot of submissions from particularly the women's rights movement, but generally people who felt very strongly that a proportional representation system also would be a better electoral system for the country.
Right.
So we reintroduced the MMPR. That was thrown out in Naivasha. We had received a lot of representations also asking, our first draft, the one that was released in November 2009, had provided for 3 levels of devolution. We had received memoranda demanding 2 levels. So the number of counties that we were proposing had come down to 47. So we were very clear that with only 47 women in the National Assembly, we were assuming, by the way, that the National Assembly would stay with 210 members. We did not envision the additional 80 seats. That bloating of the National Assembly comes from the parliamentarians themselves. It was not us. So we had assumed that we would be working with a National Assembly of 210 and that therefore there would still be a shortfall. There was still the possibility of a shortfall. And so we had provided for a system similar to what we now have in the counties, whereby parties would provide lists and women would be drawn from those to ensure that we had at least 1/3. Now, what happened was that aspect was thrown out completely in Naivasha. The parliamentarians added 80 plus seats that fit the traditional system of first past the post. And so now we ended up with a National Assembly that was bloated. And then this was the one thing they said to us was non-negotiable. The way in which they had formulated their new National Assembly.
Right.
And so we ended up with a draft that did not have, we ended up with a constitution that did not have an exact mechanism for ensuring the 1/3 in the National Assembly and in the Senate, because the Senate stops just short if you have a situation where no woman is elected, because for the Senate, the mechanism is 16 seats are reserved for women. Excuse me, in actuality, it's a total of 18 seats. 16 that are just only for women, and then there's 4 seats reserved for youth and persons with disabilities, one of whom must be a young woman and one must be a woman with disabilities.
Right.
And so you end up with 18 seats.
Right.
That, in a Senate where you have no woman elected, as happened with the first Senate, you fall short of the quota. It's better than the National Assembly, but you still fall short of the 33%. Right now, because we have 2 women who have gotten first past the post, the Senate is actually okay. But this is it's dependent on chance. The Constitution did require, however, that Parliament itself resolves this question. Article 100 requires that Parliament provides a system that ensures representation of women, persons with disabilities, etc.
Right.
And so the idea was that parliamentarians would come up with the formula that would ensure that the 1/3 principle is achieved.
Right.
Yeah, and they're supposed to have done this within the first 10 years of the Constitution.
All right. And so 10 years later, there is a fresh quest for reforms again, this time through a referendum from the BBI process. I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
I don't think that constitutional amendment is a priority for the people of Kenya today. I think it is a priority for the political elite. I don't think that in the midst of COVID-19, with all the challenges, with the economic challenges that we are facing, I don't think there is anything spectacularly wrong with the Constitution that warrants some form of amendment. And so I don't believe that BBI is necessary.
Because what they say is the BBI is meant to cure some of the issues that the 2010 Constitution has not been able to fully cover. For example, part of the key agenda, inclusivity.
They speak in rather vague ways. It would be helpful for them to specify what exactly it is. To what extent did the people of Kenya participate in identifying the issues that are being raised on BBI? These are just questions I'm posing. B, the national values and principles of governance include human dignity, equity, social justice, inclusiveness. 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 Article 10.
It is there.
It's there. Okay.
How powerful then is the Constitution as a political tool to enhance their agenda?
I can only refer to an old cliche. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. So the Kenyan people have to understand, Article 3 requires us to defend the Constitution. We have a responsibility to ourselves to defend the Constitution and demand that our political leadership respects the Constitution. We have to start standing up. It isn't the job of one or two people somewhere. You know, sometimes I think people think that maybe there is somebody that they hired called Okoiti Omtata to go and defend the Constitution.
Right.
Yeah.
It is the responsibility
it's not Omtata's responsibility, it's all of us' responsibility.
You wowed the country during your time with COE. What has Atsango Chesoni been up to all these years away from the public eye?
Reflecting, reading. I've gone through some personal issues. I lost my mother in 2017. So a lot of what's going on for me at this point in my life is just spending time with people that I love in ways that I didn't have a chance to do so. I spent a lot of my youth working on civic rights and constitutionalism. And there are lots of other things I've always enjoyed doing, like writing, especially poetry. And so
do you expect a book soon, perhaps?
I've decided the latter part of my life is probably going to be spent doing the things that I enjoy doing.
Is the job finished or unfinished? The process of women's rights, constitutional reforms? It's
not finished. In terms of what I personally wanted, I've done what I wanted, and I feel that at this stage in my life, I'm ready to contribute in a different way. Yeah, I'm not as interested in doing the same type of work. And I do think that there are other people who are committed, and maybe it's time for other people. We're at a different stage in the struggle. And so maybe not me. However, I don't think that these are things that get accomplished immediately or overnight. You know, that was getting the Constitution passed was one thing. We now have a legal framework because our previous, I'm sorry, and this is in relation even to the BBI question. The problem before was that we had a legal question. I don't think the current problem in Kenya is a legal problem. It's a problem of a political culture. And so it's not, the law didn't protect us before. That has been sorted out. It's now about changing our culture and the way in which we do things to be in conformity with the values that we feel are best for us. So for me, it's a different struggle, and maybe we need a different set of people to actually progress it forward.
And as your last remarks, and probably in terms of looking at the future, probably in the next decade or so, what vision do you especially have with regards to the rule of law in the country and the democratic space for Kenya?
My dream, because I will focus on my dream. I dream of a Kenya where the Kenyan people demand respect for the rule of law, and where every single Kenyan has a bed to go to that is warm, in a home that is safe, where Kenyans don't have to live in fear of any form of violence, and that every single Kenyan has a meal, and that every single Kenyan child has an opportunity to go to school and be educated, and every single Kenyan has access to proper health care facilities and the opportunity to advance and work on that which they love to do. So that's my dream for Kenya. And I hope that we will get there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We really appreciate your time. Atsango Chesoni there, and a Pan-Africanist at heart, if I might say, right? Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That was the big interview. Thank you. My name is Zainab Ismail.